Goeienaand en welkom, baie dankie dat julle weer eens ingeskakel het by nog 'n spitsvondige episode van Klipkop onbeskaamd in Afrikaans. Weer eens op 'n Sondag aand, ek gaan nie vanaand weer die hele spiel vir julle gee nie. Almal weet Jan van Riebeeck was al jare gelede was hy ooste toe gewees, hy het op pad terug, hy's gevang daar vir handel, privaat handel dryf, hulle het hom teruggestuur huis toe, dat hy voor die Zondo-kommissie moes kom, hy het hier aangekom by hulle die mense op die Haarlem opgetel wat die gestrand het, hulle is terug daan toe 'n paar jaar later, toe Jan van Riebeeck, toe is hy gestuur na die Kaap toe. In episode 1, 2, 3, 4 en 5 het gehandel oor wat tot nou gebeur het toe. Alles is baie vreedsaam in die Khoi, die punt was vir hulle gewees om hier te kom, om ruilhandel te bewerkstellig met die Khoi. Hulle moes die skepe ververs met ruilhandel met die Khoi se beeste en skape, maar tot dusver lyk dit nie vir ons asof die Khoi baie lus is om baie van hulle beeste en skape weg te gee, net so hier enetjie en daar enetjie miskien. Beeste veral amper glad nie, ek dink hulle, die beeste wat hulle tot dusver gekry het, ons trek nou al, ons begin nou met Desember. Die hoeveelheid beeste kan jy op jou een hand tel, sodat hulle nou by mekaar kon gemaak het. Nou natuurlik laasweek het ons gekyk na die eerste ekspedisie na Saldanha. Daar was duidelik 'n groot aantal robbe en daar was 'n mark vir robpelse gewees. So hulle toe weer, toe ek julle laasweek gelos het ek julle gesê ja, maar hulle toe weer die skipie uitgestuur. Nou natuurlik om te loop, robbejag en so voorts. En dan het ons gekyk na die handel met die Khoi. Hulle het so hier en daar het hulle 'n skapie geruil, maar beeste het hulle definitief nie opgegee nie. Nou voordat ons aangaan, wil ek net gou 'n hallo sê vir die mense in die kletskolom. Kom ek trek dit vir julle hier dat ek mooi julle in die oë kan kyk. Ek sien my levels is 'n klein bietjie laag. Julle kan ook my rekenaar, ek weet nie wat's fout met my besigheid hier. Ek moet hom nog 'n bietjie opstel. Mic check 1 2. Okay, daar level hy nou uit. Ek wil goeie naam sê aan Meer Remaster wat heel eerste was in die kletskolom. Dankie dat jy ingeskakel het. As ook Jan van Riebeeck, ons bondgenoot uit die Laagland. Dankie dat jy ingeskakel het, Johan. As ook Mike en Finnie Simpson, die ou getroues wat hier is. En ons ander spanner, Dagbreker. Hartlike goeie naand. Hierdie is een besonderste titel vanaand. Wel, dit is 'n klein bietjie clickbait, want ek weet dit vorm seker 0.25% uit van die storie wat ek vanaand wil vertel, maar ek het gedink dit sal dalk die mense se aandag trek. Wat het ek gesê? Die geval van die timmerman se gesteelde onderbroek. Dis nie 'n leuen nie, maar dit is regtig wel, dit is so min met die eintlike storie uit te waai. Daar is nou al klare spoiler alert. Brendan Campbell, goeie naam Brendan Campbell, as ook Christoph Oukamp. En RJJ is ook so met sy bruin kroontjie. Ek sien die mense gaan deur die kleure nou so een na die ander. En Finnie Simpson altyd langs aan Mike Simpson se sy goeie naam sê Klipkop en Spannermaats. As ook Lise Brown het ook ingeskakel. Goeie naam Lise, hom lanklaas vir jou gesien hier. En ek dink ek het nou vir almal. Ek het vir niemand oorgeskiep nie. Nou kom ons klim sommer in. Ek het julle gelos laasweek, dit het 'n bietjie laat geraak. Ek wil graag daar wees, dan wil ek hierdie ding voor my sit. Ek oefen altyd in my boek, dan lees ek so mooi as ek afkyk. Maar nou moet ek as ek met die kamera lees, ek kan nie, die kamera is op my pad, nou moet ek op die skerm lees. Nou verander dit so. Ek gaan probeer om vanaand 'n klein bietjie stadiger te lees. As julle dink ek klink soos 'n vertraagde mens, laat my weet, dan sal ek weer 'n bietjie vinniger lees, maar ek het na myself geluister in die vorige episodes, en dit wil vir my voorkom, asof ek 'n bietjie stadiger moet lees. Ek kan myself partykeer nie verstaan nie. Episode 6, ons begin nou Sunday Primo. Primo is natuurlik die eerste. Ek trek dat ek die klets ook so half kan sien. As hy. Hulle praat hier van Nieuw Saldanha, so ek het dit nou al van tevore agtergekom, maar hier begin praat hulle al hoe meer van, die Saldanhas was nie regtig waar 'n homogene een groep gewees nie. Dit was 'n klomp kleiner groepies gewees, soos wat dit vir my wil voorkom. En hulle het hierso 1 old and 3 fine young calves het hulle by hulle gekry. Dis een van die eerste kere wat hulle 'n klomp koeie in die hande kon kry. Sê hulle hierso, as well as 6 young and old sheep. Dan het hulle ook 2 elephant tusks gekry. Dit was nou op die eerste gewees. Op die tweede, namely 24 sturdy sheep and 2 old and 2 young head of cattle. Laat hulle sommer die eerste 2 dae al klaar 8 beeste gekry. Dit ding begin lyk al klaar baie beter. We are only now really beginning to trade. We are having much trouble with the cattle, however, for the natives part with them reluctantly, as we pretend to do with the copper plate. To all appearances, we should otherwise not obtain a single head of cattle. Nou, hulle is baie besorgd oor die beeste. Natuurlik, ons as Hollanders en ons werk met melk. Ons gaan nou sien. Nou sien, daar gaan, ons gaan nog botter maak en kaas en sulke tipe goed. In the evening saw few fires burning all over the country, from which we concluded and were also given to understand by Harry the Hottentot that there were thousands of people in the neighborhood, duisende mense in die omgewing. Nou hulle het gegryl, 12 wild ducks and 42 fine birds. Nou hulle het sommer dan en daar het opgevreet. Toe op die derde, bate 8 cattle and 12 sheep, so daar is al klaar nog 8 beeste by. Hierdie moes ek opsoek het, 1 heifer and 1 calf, as well as 9 young and old sheep. Nou soos ek het reg verstaan, 'n heifer is 'n virgin koei, jy weet, dis 'n volgroeide koei, maar dit het nog net 1 kalfie gehad, of geen kalfie, nog 'n jong koei. Dan op die 5de, today obtained only 1 cow and 11 sheep. The Saldanus with their dwellings are gradually coming nearer to us in large numbers, wherefore we try to be more on guard. Hulle sê hierso, with their dwellings. En soos ek het verstaan, lyk dit vir my, dis regtig 'n geval van, hulle slaan hulle huisies op. Daar is nou, ek weet nie hoe akkuraat hierdie voorbeeld is wat ek gekry het nie, maar hulle slaan hulle huisies op, en dan trek hulle so agter die beeste aan, soos hulle wys, soos wat die beeste en die skaap, die weiding klaar maak, dan pak hulle maar hulle huisies op, dan jaag hulle beeste na 'n ander plekkie toe, dan slaan hulle weer hulle huisies daar op, dan kamp hulle daar vir 'n week of 2. En dit smaak my, hulle is nou in die omgewing van die fort, so, die idee dat hulle juist gekom het, omdat die blankes daar was wat wou ruil, is volgens my nie heeltemal waar nie. Dis nou maar net daardie tyd van die jaar gewees, wat die mense daar verby gekom het. Of dis hoe ek dit verstaan. As jy nie met my saamstem nie, laat weet my in die kletskolom. Nog 'n ander ding, laasweek wat ek gevra het is, hierdie skaapbesigheid, hier sê Longtel vir ons, in episode 5, the cattle and sheep, where did they come from? There was sheep for 1,000 years from the Scots cave. The fat-tailed sheep came first, then cattle according to fossils. 600 years before the Dutch. Some think a trek from East Africa, too short a time. The Phoenicians, okay, so dit smaak my, daar's nie baie duidelikheid presies wanneer die skape en goed aangekom het, want dit smaak my, dit is baie lank terug. Hier het ek 'n stukkie gaan deurlees, wat ook sê, hulle is nie heeltemal seker nie, maar dit smaak my van die skape het gekom van Suidoos-Asië, en dit smaak my, daar is 'n moontlikheid dat die Khoi hulle self ook van Suidoos-Asië af is, dat hulle dalk van daar af getrek het, tot by die suidpunt van Afrika. Baie jare terug, lank voor Jan van Riebeeck. Nou die 2 grootste skape in die land op die oomblik is natuurlik die merino, dan nommer 2 die dorper skaap. Nou maar die merino is onlangs die gebring, en die dorper is steeds onlangs begin teel. Hulle praat van in die 1930s het hulle spesifiek 'n skaap begin teel wat in dorre toestande daar in die woestyn kan oorleef. Dis waarvan ons nou die merino vleiskaap kry. Maar hier was glo skaap en bees gewees al vir baie jare voor Jan van Riebeeck hier aangekom het. Hier is nog 'n stukkie. Ek kan hom miskien vir julle in die kletskool sit. Kom, daar is een stukkie. En daar is 'n ander stukkie. Hulle praat in daai stukkies ook van Jan van Riebeeck. Dis nou nie, jy weet, offisiële universiteit goed wat hulle gestudeer het. Dis nou maar 'n beriggie van klein webtuistes af, maar ek het na 'n paar loop kyk en almal, daar's redelik konsensus. Skaap en bees was hier gewees vir baie, baie lank voor Jan van Riebeeck. Nou, nou moet ek net gou weer my leesgoed hier voor my sit. As many of our men, contrary to our repeated warnings and orders, do not scruple to sleep on guard duty during the night and commit great thefts, not merely from one another, but even from the company's goods and implements, as well as from the young and mature crops in the garden. We have decided, in order to prevent this and for the better maintenance of good order, to appoint a provost marshal to serve the court of justice as executioner at the same time, with a view of instilling a little more fear into the common people. This appointment, the person named Michiel Glewe of Straalsund, being a capable man, voluntarily accepted at a salary of 15 guilders per month, plus the emoluments attached thereto, according to the custom in India and provided by resolution in this connection, special passed today. Nou maar, ek het nog nie lekker agter die kap van die bel gekom, jy, hulle praat hierso van Michiel Glewe was glo nie die soetste ou op aarde gewees nie, hy het ook 100 houe gekry, maar ek kan nie kry waar hulle in die anderste in die boek weer praat van Michiel Glewe nie. Ek kan miskien later terugkom, dalk sal dit later duidelik raak. In elk geval, daar is nou 'n nuwe polisieman in die dorp, Michiel Glewe. Kom maar, vat net gou so 'n swing van my koffie. Ek voel my keel is al klaar droog. Nine young and old cattle, hulle kan nou meer en meer bees, as well as 22 sheep and lambs, which we obtained from them for copper and tobacco. The latter always decides the transaction. Natuurlik, hulle is liewer vir tabak as hulle verkoper is. If we had no tobacco, there would hardly be any trade. As a whole cow would often be withheld for a finger's length of tobacco or a pipe. We should therefore be provided with 1,000 pounds annually, which should moreover be of good quality. For if there is the least rot in the tobacco, they can taste it immediately and will not look at it, calling it stinking tobacco. Among these Saldaners there were 2 new captains who requested to see our house, which we granted them, treating them in a friendly way to 3 or 4 drinks and a little tobacco. They like this so much that it makes them the more favorably disposed towards us. Meanwhile, we saw on the slope beside the Table Mountain the pasturage and the country all around covered with sheep and cattle like grass on the veld. These the said captains pointed out and gave us to understand were theirs. Ek het al hier deurgelees en ek weet nie hoe baie die waarheid hulle hier gepraat het nie. They also intend bringing their huts and settling down close to us and want to bring their wives tomorrow to see our houses and wives. We said this would be good and would give us pleasure, although we would have preferred not to have them make their abode so near to us, as they are countless in number and we are not yet too well entrenched ourselves. Hope, however, that there will be no danger for us and that the Almighty will protect us. The said Saldaners, however, are at heart as well as in appearance most affable. At any rate, whenever one of our cattle runs away, they immediately fetch it for us for 1 inch of tobacco. But if they can get hold of a plate of copper, they do not fail to do so. Want daar is nou die eerste keer wat ek hoor dat hulle koper gesteel het by die Hollanders. Oh, as we witnessed only today. Daar sê hy ook, as we witnessed only today. Moreover, if the cattle run away after having been bartered from them, they return the copper to us until they have brought the cattle back to our pasture grounds. But they need to be treated affably, kindly, resolutely and cheerfully, which is easily done and costs nothing. Nou maar dit gee vir my 'n beskrywing van baie goeie verhoudings met die plaaslike inboorlinge. Nou ons gaan nou vanaand meer as een skelm, skermunkel gaan ek aan julle voorstel. Ons begin met Martinus de Haas. Last night a certain Martinus de Haas left his post as sentry and went into the garden below the fort just across the moat, where he pulled out over 70 turnips. He was caught by the patrol and brought to the main guardhouse. Early this morning, as soon as the gate was open and he had drunk his ration, he ran away, apparently out of fear for the punishment he deserved, which, we fear, will now be heavier than before, as he has several times been caught committing such and other thefts, but for the sake of the uprightness of his parents, was each time let off with light punishment to avoid scandal. Nou ek wonder wie sy parents was. Hoekom hulle so belangrik was dat as ek nou hier uit moet aflei, klink dit vir my asof hierdie De Haas mannetjie redelik jonk was sy ouers nog in Holland gewees, was sy ouers gesiene mense gewees in Holland, het hulle dalk vir die maatskappy gewerk, ek weet nie. Hulle sê net hier onder, see information of De Haas, nou dit is nou goed, wat nou nie in die boek beskikbaar is nie. Today also, Jan Pietersen Soenwater for theft committed while on guard duty of the company's copper wire, with which, for lack of iron hoops, the wheels of the barrows had been bound to prevent splitting, was condemned by the council for this fortress to be flogged with rods in public, as is fully recorded in the sentence passed. Nou maar ek het nou bietjie gekou oor hier, dit was nie baie duidelik hier gewees nie, maar later dan kom daar duidelikheid, dit is die kruiwaans se wiele het begin uit mekaar het bars, toe vat die mense die koperdraad, versterk hulle die wiele, nou hy het daar die versterkings gaan staan en afknip, en dit waar hy geverkoop het aan die Hottentotte, dit is hoekom hy geslaan was. Op die 7de, last night the carpenter's chests in the carpenter's shop outside the fort were broken open and robbed of various articles, namely from the chief carpenter's chest, one cloth suit, one pair of white kersey underpants, 4 shirts, 4 or 5 copper rings for the axles of the wheelbarrows, some knives and 1 pair of shoes. From the chest of Willem Gabrielsen, 1 quarter, en daardie woord is, kan hulle uitgemaak het in die boekie, guinea linen, 6 knives, 1 pair of new shoes, 1 small copper pot, half a book of paper and pens, and from the chest of Frans Hendriksen of Vleute, 1 chisel. All this is presumed to have been done by the said Martinus de Haas, who has not shown himself so far. A corporal and 6 musketeers were therefore sent to look for him, but they could not find him. Dan, weer nog 'n bietjie diplomatie. Ek gaan weer 'n slukkie van my koffie vat. Daar het julle nou die saak van die vermiste onderbroek. Ek het nie gesê vermiste onderbroekie. Sy gesteelde onderbroek. Ek moet eintlik gesê het vermiste onderbroek. In elk geval, so hy het Hy het 'n klomp groente en goed gesteel, toe hy weggehardloop, en dit lyk vir my asof hy in die aand teruggekom het, en nog 'n klomp goed gekom steel het. Hierdie mannetjie se vingers juk. Ons gaan nou weer na diplomatie toe. Today they grazed with at least 2,000 sheep and cattle to within half cannon shot from the fort. Dis 'n asemrowende klomp beeste en skape. We bartered 21 head from them, 1 cow, 2 heifers and 18 sheep for copper and tobacco. They were more reluctant to part with their cattle than with their sheep. We took everything we could get for copper and tobacco, however. So also bought 3 sheep, each for an old driver or caulking iron and length of tobacco. Ek het nou hierdie caulking iron loop opsoek. 'n Caulking iron dis basies 'n bytel. Hulle gebruik die caulking iron as hulle die skepe regmaak of die borde op die skepe opsit. Dan vat hulle tou, dan vat hulle hierdie bytel tussen die skep die planke. Dan kap hulle hierdie tou tussen die planke in om dit waterdig te maak. Nou dis waarvoor die caulking iron gebruik word. Man, die ding is seker 2 handbreed is hy wyd. So dis 'n baie klein implement. Dis basies 'n bytel. The former they used instead of cold chisels, nou praat hulle eers van die caulking iron, is therefore to be wished we had a number of them, for we have previously also obtained a reasonable large calf for one, a reasonably large calf for one, and these people are very anxious to obtain them. Today a young ox escaped from our pasture land and disappeared from sight, getting among the Saldanha's cattle. After we had already written it off, the Saldanha's captain returned it to us, whereupon we treated him most royally with eating, drinking, and a little tobacco, which to them is the most pleasant entertainment to make them more favorably disposed towards us. So julle kan sien, die Saldanha's oor die algemeen, hulle het nie aan mekaar in ons kom moeilikheid soek of wat ek kan nie. Hulle het ook nie gekom en heeltyd ons goed probeer steel of wat ek kan nie. Hulle bring ons goed terug. Natuurlik vir so 'n klein beloningkie vir 'n ensie, jy weet. Vir 'n ensie. Hulle praat hier van die suidooste wind. Ek het in die vorige maande het ek baie keer oor die wind gelees, maar hulle gaan net op praat juist oor die suidooste wind, en dit is waar hier in die Kaap. Daar is tot 'n TV-program wat hulle noem die suidooster, want die suidooster kan in die Kaap verskriklik waai. Ek het net so hier en daar gemerk, violently from the southeast. Sondag die 8ste, 11 young and old cattle and 29 very fine sheep. Dis hulle geruil het. Today some Saldanha's set fire to the grass, and as the fire came rather close to our pasture grounds, we requested them not to come so near with their fire, whereupon they all immediately set to and extinguished it without delay, for which we rewarded them with a finger length of tobacco. It would seem as if they seek not to do us any harm, but to show us all the friendship they can, which we are reciprocating. Nevertheless, being on our guard and keeping good watch and supervision over everything. Nou kan julle vir my sê, hoekom dink julle het hulle die veld aan die brand gesteek? Was hulle verveeld gewees? Ek het 'n idee hoekom. Actually nee, ek lieg vir julle, ek weet hoekom. Maar weet julle, sê vir my, die antwoord sal 'n bietjie later kom. Kyk of een van julle 'n spoiler kan gee. The said Saldanha's were again grazing thousands of cattle and sheep close to and around our fort today, avoiding only the pasture land occupied by us. They seem to have great confidence in us. Dan die volgende dag praat hulle weer van 6 cattle and 36 sheep. So natuurlik, dit is dan nog nie grootskaalse handel nie, maar die handel kom in. Die handel kom in. Hier is ons nou weer terug by Martinus de Haas, die onderbroekdief. Martinus de Haas was seen by the sentry this morning on the bank of the river and brought in wearing the carpenter's clothes, which he had stolen from the carpenter's shop the night before last. The other things which he had stolen were all found in the little bush where he had concealed them. When questioned this afternoon, he voluntarily confessed that during the night of the 5th and the 6th instant, he had left his post as sentry and picked from the garden a good quantity of turnips, which he threw away next to the small land gate. Nou, wat is turnips? Is dit radyse of wat is dit? Hoekom sal jy so baie turnips gaan pluk en dan dadelik weer weggooi? Ek verstaan dit nie. Where they were found, also that fearing punishment for theft, he had run away and hid himself nearby in the bush. The night before last, however, he had climbed through an open window into the carpenter's shop, where he had broken open the chests and removed the articles mentioned above, intending to barter them for food from the Saldaners. So die ou wou 'n bosman, hy het gedink hy wil net so 1 of 2 etes nog kan koop en dan gaan hy verder in die bos bly toe laterand. Lyk dit vir my was die bos nie meer so vriendelik met hom gewees nie. When he showed them the copper rings on the wheelbarrows, however, they, on seeing that he was alone, robbed him of them, as well as of 4 knives, which the men will come to miss, and the honourable company its copper. Nou maar daar het hulle, hy het gaan steel by die maatskappy, toe steel die hottentotte die goed by hom. Dit klink vir my eintlik so half regverdig as jy daaraan dink. He added that he had not committed these thefts out of a thievish disposition, but to give cause to the court to sentence him to death, requesting a bullet through the head instead of the gallows. He also openly admitted that he had previously on various occasions taken turnips, carrots and other fruits from the garden, as well as eggs, which were found missing from the hens' nests, praying for no other mercy than that of getting a bullet through the head. He appeared to be quite desperate, so decided to suspend his case and to keep him in confinement until the arrival of the returned fleet from India, and then to hand him over to the commander of the same. Nou maar daar het hulle dit, die onderbroek dief smaak my is 'n bietjie mal en dit smaak my, hierdie ou het ook 'n doodswens, of dis ten minste wat hy vir Jan van Riebeeck hulle gesê het. Wat sê julle daar omtrent in die kletskolom? Lieflik. Heerlik man, heerlik. Finnie Simpson sê, dit reën by ons. Jy moet ver van ons wees, want het was nogal 'n lieflike warm dag hier by ons gewees in die Weskus. Die kopersteel besigheid lyk my een ewige Suid-Afrikaanse verskynsel. Hierdie is nou die eerste keer dat ek hoor dat hulle sê het ook, dis eerste keer dat hulle sien dat die Saldaners of die Khoi by ons koper gesteel het. Maar ek meen, ons het al koper by onsself ook gesteel, so ek meen, in verhouding met hoe baie Khoi daar in die omgewing was, en hoeveel keer hulle ons skape en beeste en goed teruggebring het. En daar was kere wat ons skaap en beeste by hulle gekoop het, wat die goed weggehardloop het, dan sê hulle, wow, hierso is julle koper en goed terug, hou dit totdat ons julle vee vir julle terugbring, dan kom hulle met die vee terug en kry hulle koper. Jy weet, verskriklike, lieflike verhoudings wat die was. Daar was 1 of 2 gevalle gewees van die wat rammetjie uitnek geraak het, maar dit was definitief dis baie groot minderheid, die oorweldigende meerderheid smaak dit was goeie verhoudings gewees. Christo D sê, wel as mens so luister, was daar definitief 'n wederwysige respek. Ja, net so. Swerm G sê, Martinus de Haas was 'n skorrie-morrie. Het smaak my, hy was 'n bietjie tatie in sy kop gewees. André Lou sê vir ons, hi Klipkop, André Lou, Eiserfontein. Sorry ek is laat, maar ek is saam met jou, love dit. Geniet jou aan, dankie. André Lou, daar word nou nog 'n bietjie gepraat. Omdat jy van Eiserfontein is, welkom in elk geval. Ek glo jy het seker redelik belangstel aan wat hier rondom Saldanha Baai gebeur het, en ons gaan vanaand nog 'n bietjie daaroor praat. Maar dis eers heel teen die einde. Ek is al 'n halfuur aan die gang. Ek weet nie of ek vanaand daarby gaan uitkom nie. Ok, ek gaan met 'n halfuur ook. As ek nou weer met julle. Christo D, skelm, dief, boef, skobbejak, skerminkel. Ek like nog die skerminkel ene. Skobbejak is vir my ook 'n mooi woord. Jou skobbejak. Gulden, we used to write amount with FL, which stands for Florian. Florienen. But the currency was gulden. Brendan Campbell sê vir ons, as jy nou buite toe gaan op die horison kyk, in die rek ooste, sal jy vir Mars sien. Ons gaan 'n bietjie vanaand na, wat is dit, astronomie of astrologie? Astronomie. Ons gaan vanaand juis ook 'n bietjie praat oor astronomie. Byt net vas Brendan Campbell, hier's 'n spesiale stukkie, spesiaal vir jou, vir julle mense wat daarvan hou om julle oë op in die hemel in te slaan en vir die sterre te kyk. Anti-Marx ZY is ook hier, so my genigtig, welkom. Ok, ek gaan gou hierdie ouetjie nip, sal ek hom nou weer takel. Skryf vir jou eers hierso, dan wil ek vir jou daar hê, dan kan ons nou verder lees. Waar het ek geëindig hierso? Ja, ons is nou by Martinus de Haas. Die ou is dis dalk waar vanaf die spreekwoord kom, jy is so mal soos 'n haas. Dit kan dalk moontlik wees. Ek gaan dit moet loop opsoek. Have also for the first time drunk the milk of cows and sheep. From this, the sick have already received much nourishment, and they will be able to enjoy more every day. So die mense begin drink al hulle eie melk, en hulle het die volgende dag 12 cattle and 18 sheep gerul. Die veehandel begin tel op. Dan sê hulle, few Saldanas turned up today on account of the wet weather, so that we obtained only 5 sheep. There are large numbers of them at the salt and fresh rivers. In order to meet possible surprise attack, we took the soldiers away from the work today, so that they may do guard duty only, day and night. So dit smaak my, die mense is nou bitter naby aan die fort, en ek glo 'n groot menigte van hulle, duisende van hulle glo, altesaam. Dan, hier's altyd so 'n interessante tabelletjie. Smaak my, daar was 125 Europeërs aan die Kaap gewees gedurende daardie tyd. Die mense wat wil lank hier kyk, kan maar die videoetjie pause, kan hulle mooi daarna kyk. Ek is seker hy het nou al gefokus. Die volgende dag, 2 cows and 5 sheep wat hulle geruil het. Dan op die 13de, the Saldanas with thousands of cattle and sheep came so close to our fort that their cattle nearly mingled with ours. 20 sheep, 2 cows, and 5 calves were obtained, they being very unwilling to part with any more cattle. It is very sad to behold such fine herds of cattle and be unable to purchase anything worthwhile. And although to allure them and to make them eager, we offered them 1/3 more copper than previously for each beast, and in addition treated them with all the friendliness in the world. They could not be swayed. So dit smaak my, die ou Jan van Riebeeck begin raak nou desperaat. Hy het nou al klaar sy prys opgestoot. Hy wil graag, terwyl hier nou beeste en skaap in die omgewing is, wil hy koop. Maar dit smaak my, die ouens is baie suinig oor hulle beeste. Today we had, okay, hierso is nou, die goed kom so 'n paar keer op in die boek, 'n bose plan. ek moet actually hierdie bygelees het. Whether they have already been glutted with copper, there being perhaps no consumption of it among them, or whether they are holding back out of envy or mischievous incitement, we cannot really tell. If only we knew, for it would be a pity to see these herds leave without being able to do further trading. Nou hier kom die bose plan nou. Today we had ample opportunity of depriving them of 10,000 head of cattle, and had we been allowed to do so. If we are ordered to do this, it can always be done at some future date. This would suit us even better, for the Soldaners trust us more and more as the days go by. Once we had possession of so many cattle, we could maintain an adequate supply by breeding. Moreover, we should have no fear of the English touching here and spoiling the cattle trade with the natives. These people daily gave us sufficient cause by stealing and carrying away our possessions. We are so often subjected to this that we have enough reason for taking revenge by capturing them or their cattle. Nou maar hierdie is 'n bietjie teenstrydig. Ons het nou 'n bietjie dag teruggelees dat dit die eerste keer was dat iemand van hulle gesteel het. Daar was 'n paar ander gevalle gewees waar ons gaan actually nog daarby uitkom, waar daar vee verdwyn het. Maar dit smaak met die Hollanders wat na die vee gekyk het. 'n Mens moet 'n bietjie vir hulle ook onder 'n vraagteken sit. Want daar was 'n paar keer aangeneem gewees dat die Hottentotter dit gesteel het. Want ek nie weet nie, want dit smaak my daar was 'n paar klomp skelms gewees tussen hierdie, ek weet nie, jy sit met 'n klomp seerowers basies wat jy in werk geneem het. Ek meen hierdie seerowers is rowwe Jacksons. In elk geval, if one cannot get the cattle trade from them by friendly trading, why should one then suffer their thieving without making any reprisal? This would only be necessary once with 150 men, 10 or 12,000 cattle could be secured without the danger of losing a single person. On the other hand, many savages could be captured without a blow, as they always come to us unarmed. They could then be sent to India as slaves. This, however, requires more consideration and wiser judgment than ours alone. It is only in passing that we refer to it on this occasion. It could be considered and deliberated more fully later on, after more experience, in the event of our receiving higher orders to that effect. En daar het julle nou die hele bose plan. Jan van Riebeeck sit met 'n gedagte. Although we gave more copper and tobacco than before, we obtained no more than 15 cows and calves and 31 sheep. 15 koeie is, in verhouding met die ander dae, is dit eintlik baie. O genade, my lampie gaan nou gaan. The more we offer, the more they try to get. It is always so. Maar hier is 'n prentjie vir julle. The East Indies House in Amsterdam. As julle van prentjies uit ou boeke uithou, daar is vir julle 'n prentjie. Waar trek ons nou al? Ons trek nou al by Sondag die 15de Desember 1652. Die jaar is amper op sy rug. Dis amper, nie Boxing Day nie, wat is dit, gelofte dag. Sondag die 15de. We could not barter more than 4 cows, 1 calf and 11 sheep from them, as every day they want more and more copper for the cattle, so that we notice the more we offer and give, the more they want. We therefore today also adopted a somewhat reluctant attitude. If matters do not improve, however, we shall have to give still more. We must first obtain a good number of cattle, then in due course, through breeding, we can become independent. Nou hier is 'n subnota. From this it appears that the Europeans soon saw that they could not depend on the cattle trade to supply the required slaughter cattle, but that they would have to start their own stock breeding. This point is emphasized several times later in the journal. Dan gee hulle daar voorbeelde. Waar was ek nou gewees? Hier by nommer 1. So far have only 88 cattle and 96 sheep, young and old at pasture, besides those slaughtered for the men from day to day. So ons was, toe ons nou vanaand se episode begin het, was daar 'n handjievol beeste gewees, en nou is daar al 88 beeste, en ek dink daar was so 100 skape omtrent gewees, en daar is nou 269 skape. Nou hier kom nou weer nog 'n bitter lang leesstuk, wat ek voel net, ek kan net nie oor die goed spring nie, anders te verloor mens so baie konteks, en die storie is ook vir my nogal opwindend. Today a Saldana stole a small plate of copper from us. One of the soldiers, seeing this, grabbed him by the hand, and before we were aware of it, causing quite a commotion, and all the Saldanas took to flight. Having through Harry called them back, we gave their chief to understand that we were not offended by the incident, as we well knew that it had not been with his consent, whereupon we again renewed the trade. Even so, fear seemed to linger with them, as they immediately drove all their cattle away. Hulle seker nou maar net versigtig, jy weet. Shortly afterwards, having found 3 head of cattle being driven by a Hottentot near our herd, and thinking that they had been lifted, we sent 3 or 4 men who intercepted them close to the natives and their large herds of cattle. Nou, maar dit is nou juist hoekom hulle bees gevat het en maar eerder geloop het, want ek sien, toe daar nou ewe skielik 2 of 3 van hulle verbykom met 'n paar beesies, daar word hulle nou geïntercept. The natives all ran into the bush and up to the mountain, leaving their cattle at the mercy of our men, who eventually called them back. Our men explained that their intention was only to see whether the said cattle belonged to us, but finding this not to be the case, they did not covert their cattle, but only asked them courteously to exchange them with us for copper, whereupon a new friendship was immediately created, and in the evening a few of them again came to the fort with sheep. But if our 4 men, who were armed only with swords, had so decided, they could easily and without hindrance had driven a herd of 40 or 50 cattle to the fort, because, as stated before, the Saldanas had run away and left the cattle to our 4 comrades. From this, their timid nature can be perceived. So in the evening, when a certain captain or chief person came to us in fear, we assured him of our good intentions toward them, that we had not the least inclination to do them any harm, that we wished to show them all the friendship in the world and to trade with them like brothers. We also undertook to give them as much copper and tobacco for their cattle as we and they could in equity agree upon, requesting them to bring us as many as they pleased. We showed them some copper and gave them to understand that we had brought it for them. We also told them that more would arrive with the ships, and that we would give it to them in exchange for cattle and sheep. We also added that we were not the kind of people who sought to take away anything by force, but that on the contrary, we were disposed to grant them everything they asked of us in return, of what we might want and might be useful to us. Treated the captain kindly and well with eating, drinking, and a little tobacco, as well as a little laughing and talking, etc., so that when he departed towards dusk, he was quite content, promising to return in the morning with cattle. Mense, ek sien ek begin val al oor my woorde. So daar begin, jy weet, so klein bietjie wrywing begin ontwikkel tussen die Hollanders en die plaaslike inboorlinge, maar ek meen ten minste die van Jan van Riebeeck se kant af wil dit vir my voorkom, asof hy die goeie verhoudinge wil aanhou. Wat ek so lekker verstaan nie is hulle kan nie verstaan hoekom die Saldaners nou hulle beeste vat en begin wegtrek van die mense af nie. Maar dit is duidelik dat die Hollanders toe begin rondhardloop en kyk, ja, wie steel in. Kyk, ja, daar stap 'n paar ouens met beeste, kom ons loop kyk daar so, vat die perde. Julle gaan nou later sien, dit is ons eie mense wat ons eie goed steel. O ja, ek het nou redelik agter geraak. Eiswart, ek is laat, YOLO julle. Eiswart is ons YOLO man. Andre Lou, hy Klipkop, Andre Lou is er, o ja, ek het daai klaar gekry. Een bietjie astronomie, Ziener van Rensburg, my hemel Klipkop, gaan dit goed met jou? Alles kits agter die rits. Astronomie, nie astrologie nie, astronomie. Rode Trieter, Klipkop, doe so voort. Waar is my snuiftwak? Er is Hakie baan, ahoy, kom nou by die huis, sal opvang, naand, almal, goeie naand, dankie dat jy ingeskakel het, er is Hakie baan. Ek net so 'n bietjie, ek probeer my bes om mooi en duidelik te lees vanaand, maar dit smaak my, ek lees, maar ek begryp nie eers wat ek lees nie. Okay, let's go, so 'n klein bietjie wrywing tussen ons en die Saldaners. Nou, nie daai nie, daai ene. 16de Desember, Geloftedag. They brought no more than 1 head of cattle and 4 sheep for sale. Of these they drove 3 sheep away again, although we were giving and offering more copper than before, so that we are more and more coming to the conclusion that they are becoming glutted with copper and have no other use for it than as ornaments for themselves. If this is so, it is certain that we shall not be able to obtain many more cattle unless we resort to other means, which at present would be premature. Wat se other means praat hy van? Is dit dalk deel van die bose plan? Nou hier praat ons nou oor die fishermen. Nou maar hulle is nou natuurlik die groep van die Hottentotte wat meer na die ooste toe gebly het, na Mossel Baai se kant toe. Maar hier kry ons nou ook uiteindelik bietjie duidelikheid. Ek gaan nou weer deur alles lees. The Hottentot Harry, whom as said before we use as interpreter, explained to us, as he has done before now, that when these Saldaners had left, another tribe called fishermen would arrive, with only cattle and no sheep, and if we wished to render him and the Saldaners a service, we should kill them. Nou, maar hierdie is nou die tweede keer wat hierdie storie vertel word. We should kill the fishermen and take their cattle, which could be done easily enough, as according to him they were a weak tribe. In reply we said that we accepted all those as friends who wished to trade with us, whether they were fishermen, watermen or Saldanemen. Nou, maar dit is hoe ek so 'n paar episodes terug gesê het, dit lyk vir my daar so is, of ten minste ons het hulle gegroepeer in 3 verskillende groepe. Fishermen, watermen en Saldanemen. Dit is so half duidelik nou dat die Saldanemen is nie eintlik een homogene groep nie. Dit is so, hulle is een groot groep, maar hulle bly in sulke in kleiner groepies, so 8 of 9, 10 mense saam, dan pak hulle huitjies op en elke net so 'n paar skapies of beestetjies of wat ook al. Daar was die een geval gewees van een kaptein wat gesê het, hierdie duisende skape is myne, maar hy kon dalk gelieg het. Jy weet net dat hulle dink, ja, ek is belangrik, daar kry jy nog te bak of so iets. Maar sover as wat ek die ander goed lees en kyk, lyk dit vir my asof dit kleiner groepies was wat saamgebly het. We had come here bringing copper and tobacco to exchange for cattle and to do no harm or wrong to any person, nor have we sought to do him or the Saldanhaman, waterman or fisherman any harm, but decided to live in friendship with the one as well as the other. This seemed to please him as far as he and the Saldanhaman were concerned, but not to our reluctance to destroy the fisherman. A decision would be premature. This matter should first be investigated to see what profit could be secured for the honourable company. Nou, maar hy het net gepraat van sy bose plan om die Saldanha mense se beeste en goed af te vat, maar dit lyk nou vir my, hy kom met 'n idee van, hy wil graag die waterman, die waterman, die fisherman, se beeste afvat. Nog 'n bose plan. Op die 17de, the Saldanhas came with a few sheep, a cow and a calf for sale, but we could with difficulty obtain only one of the 4. So die ouens raak al hoe meer synig. They are an extraordinary people. When we believe that we have won them over and are making good progress, they suddenly withdrew and drive away their cattle as if they were terrified or something. Although we do everything in our power to satisfy them in every way. The result was that today we did not secure more than 1 cow, 1 calf and 11 sheep for more copper and tobacco than we had ever given. Maar ek dink die probleem hierso was, hulle het nie elke keer met dieselfde groepie gepraat nie. Daar was nie een groot hoofman wat hulle gehoop het of gedink het daar was nie. Dis wat dit vir my wil voorkom. Hier kom ons nou. In the evening between 9 and 10 o'clock, saw east, southeast and southward from the head of the giant, that is Orion, about 80 degrees above the horizon, a strange star with a tail, the tail extending northwards right on the knees of the giant, and the head mostly to the south, about 10 degrees away. Dis nou natuurlik 'n komeet. Nou maar hierdie mense het vir ons gaan opsoek waaroor gaan die komeet. As julle graag wil na die tyd hierdie gaan lees, julle kan maar hierdie stukkie pause. Ek glo hy is nou in fokus. Ek hoop my sal dit kan lees, maar daarso is nou al die inligting wat julle nodig het oor hierdie komeet wat is die datum gewees? Die 17de Desember 1652 gesien is deur Jan van Riebeeck hier in die Kaap. Op die 18de, op die 17de nog, today Jan Pietersen Soenwater, brought to justice for theft, ran away, apparently for fear of punishment for theft again committed yesterday of the fat of an ox slaughtered for the mens. So die ou het gaan vet steel en daar hardloop Jan Pietersen Soenwater ook weg, die ouens maak van dros. Op die 18de, the Saldanhas again came with thousands of cattle grazing in the vicinity of the fort, indeed almost entering through the gate and being kept out of the gardens with difficulty. They were not eager to trade, however, as they no longer cared for copper, and our conviction is growing stronger and stronger that they have already been glutted with copper. If this is so, the cattle trade will not advance much. Harry also told us that henceforth we should not obtain more than 1 head of cattle and a sheep or 2 now and then, as they had already received much copper from us, which they were busy making into bracelets and chains for ornaments. Maar hier gaan ons nou weer na 'n bose plan. If then there is no longer any trade to be expected, would it matter so much if one deprived them of some 6,000 or 8,000 cattle? For this there would be ample opportunity, as we have observed that they are not very strong. Indeed, they are extremely timorous. Often only 2 or 3 of them would drive 1,000 cattle within range of our cannon, and it would therefore be quite easily to cut them off. We notice also that they trust us in everything, and without any fear come close to the fort to graze their cattle. We make them even more fearless by encouraging them still more and more with friendly faces and kindly treatment. Firstly, to see whether in course of time anything good might be done with them in the shape of trade or something else for the benefit of the honourable company. And secondly, without their confidence in us, to be in a better position easily and without a blow to deprive them of their cattle and to take these for the honourable company. Should we at any time receive the order to do so, it is really too sad to see so great a number of cattle to remain so much in need of them for the refreshment of the company's ships, and yet to be unable to obtain anything worthwhile in return for merchandise and kind treatment. Maar ek dink hulle het die verkeerde produkte aan die Khoi probeer verkoop. Ek dink daar is hierdie stereotype dat die Engelse is beter besigheids, is goeie besigheidsmense. En ek dink dit is waar, want die Engelse het vir hulle reis gebring. Ons het voor gelees, die Engelse het baie reis vir hulle gebring. En veral vir mense soos hierdie, reis is iets wat jy lekker saam met jou kan vat. En dit swaal verskriklik baie op. So, ek glo hulle het baie van reis gehou, en die reis hou ook lank. So, hulle kon 1 keer 'n jaar 'n klomp reis geruil het, vir 'n klomp vee ensovoorts, en die Khoi kon dit werklik gebruik het. Hulle het die koper gebruik vir kralletjies en so aan, en hulle het die tabak gerook, en dit is waar het geëindig het. Ek dink hulle het 'n baie groter waarde op reis gesit. Ons gaan nou verder lees van die verhoudinge met die Khoi en die Engelse. Op die 20ste het al hierdie stuk gelees. The Saldanhas again appeared with a fair number of cattle grazing in the vicinity of the fort, but brought no more than 4 sheep for sale. 3 het ek klaar gelees. It is a good thing, therefore, that they so keenly desire tobacco, which finds ready consumption among the men. It is to be wished we had some more. Dit smaak my hulle tabak begin raak nou op. Saw the star with the tail, now in the northeast northwards from the belt of the giant, about 60 degrees above the horizon. Nou die gee so update oor die plase. Nou, ek gaan nie in te veel diepte ingaan oor die plase nie. Die plase doen goed. Hy sê net, this is our first experimental year, en hy praat van it's not manured, maar hulle kry nou beeste, so hulle kon nou nie mis in die grond inwerk nie, maar dit smaak my, hulle gaan nou beginne mis in die grond inwerk. But the desire of the Saldanhas for copper seems to be passing completely, as we observe more and more every day. Only today, after we had treated one of the chiefs well in our house and showed him much copper besides offering more for the cattle than before, he seemed to give us little hope of more cattle being offered for sale, asking us, as so many do daily, when the ships will arrive, particularly the English ships. For this reason, we have half an idea that the interpreter we employ, the Hottentot Harry, is urging them to hold out for the English. He has a greater esteem for them than for us, having been to Bantam with their ships before now. From all his actions also, it is evident that he is very partial to them. We are therefore afraid that we might have some trouble with the English when they come here for refreshment, but we hope that the time and opportunity will show us the means of preventing this. Would would that we could speedily receive orders whether or not we are to prevent them from trading with the natives. We sincerely hope to receive it hereafter. Pro memoria. Nou hierdie pro memoria beteken nota bene. Kyk hierso, asseblief ons soek antwoord op hierdie. Today obtained only three sheep, en daar het hulle weer die komeet gesien, Sondag die 22ste, obtained 5 sheep from the Saldanhas. Notice the melons sown on the 17th, also already coming up. The manure seems to be doing much good, as those previously sown in unmanured ground always die. So die mis wat hulle ingewerk het, help vir die groeibesigheid, gee vir 'n Hollander genoeg mis en hy sal boer. During the night, a sailor named Switzer Tennyson Pyle died from sickness. Nou maar hier is nou die eerste keer in 'n baie lang tyd dat ons hoor dat iemand oorlede is. Ek bedoel, as dit nie opgekom het, sou ons so half vergeet het dat daar so 'n maand of 2 gelede het die mense gevrek soos vlee. So dit smaak met die ergste van die siekte is definitief verby. Op die 23ste, notice no Saldanhas with or without cattle in the vicinity of the fort today. But our men who had gone to the Salt River to fish saw them leaving their camps with thousands of cattle and sheep and going inland. Harry gives us hope, however, that they will return as soon as the grass which they have everywhere burned will have sprung up again. Nou, hoekom word dit genoem? Dit smaak vir my, hierdie is die normale proses wat hierdie groter groep Saldanhas gevolg het. Hulle het hulle vee gewei. As die weiding klaar is, dan steek hulle daardie weiding aan die brand. Ek neem aan, dit is om die goed weer te help groei. Dit is hulle manier van crop rotation, weiveld rotering. Hulle werk so half in 'n sirkel. Hulle wei, steek brand, skuif aan. As hulle volgende jaar dieselfde tyd daar aankom, dan het die nuwe goed alweer gegroei. Dis hoe dit vir my wil voorkom. At present provided with only 89 cattle and 284 sheep. Nou, die mense hulle begin bemark nou hulle tabak. Sent the bookkeeper van der Helm and the provisional sergeant with 6 musketeers to the camp of the Saldanhas, about 2 or 3 miles from here, to find out exactly the position which they had left or not, at the same time to observe how strong they really are in number, also to learn whether they would rather trade with us there than here at the fort. Gave them a good wooden box full of cut tobacco and pipes, with which to treat the natives. They returned towards midday with a few Saldanhas who had with them 1 head of cattle and 5 sheep, which we bartered from them with copper and tobacco. Our men reported that many Saldanhas had already left with their cattle. They had found only 2 camping places, the one consisting of 9 and the other of 8 huts. Including women and children, there were not more than 70 or 80 souls, and among these were about 40 able-bodied men. They had with them about 700 or 800 cattle and 1,500 sheep. When they first saw our men, these natives were alarmed and drove their cattle, herded together near their huts up the mountain. But our men called to them, saying that they had copper, and gave them to understand that they intended no harm, but wished to show them all the friendship in the world. So they came back to our men, who gave them a pipeful of tobacco each, and persuaded them to come to the fort with 1 beast and the 5 sheep, which, as said before, were bartered from them. Dit maak me daar is nie heeltemal meer sulke uitstekende verhoudings nie, maar dit is duidelik dat die Hollanders probeer, jy weet, hulle probeer. Maar dit wil nie vir my voorkom asof die Saldanhas regtig waar die goed aan hulle wou verkoop het in die eerste plek nie. Ek kry net so half daardie gevoel, dis van, hulle het nou maar daar verby getrek, omdat nou hulle proses was, dis wat hulle elke jaar gedoen het. In any case, the natives appeared to be very much afraid of us, more so than before. We also notice that Harry seems to be more inclined towards the English, about whom he is always talking than to us, and he may well therefore have advised the Saldanhas to hold back their cattle until the English come. He has already explained to us fairly definitely when, according to his estimate, the English will arrive here from India. The Saldanhas are likewise always inquiring about the ships, and particularly the English ships. To this we reply through Harry, if we can assume that he correctly interprets our words, that the copper from the ships will be handed over to us for trading with them, and that we in turn would distribute the cattle among the ships. Nou dink julle, hulle het nou vir Harry die waarheid vertel daar. Dit klink nie vir my asof dit die waarheid is nie, ek meen, hulle is so half in 'n oorlog met die Engelse. So ek dink hulle het so 'n bietjie van 'n leuen vertel hier. So that they might as well negotiate with us, as we still had enough copper and tobacco for them. We are in some doubt, however, as to whether he faithfully interprets our words to them, for we have often been able to trade more successfully without him than in his presence. Once the English come here, however, we shall be better able to find out how much they value each other. Nou praat hy hiervan, hy is bekommerd oor hoe faithful Harry is in sy vertolking, maar kyk hoe eerlik was hy met sy vertolking. Ek dink dit is hypocrisy. Jan van Riebeeck, nee man, sies vir jou. Jan van Riebeeck, jy moet ook 'n kind van die waarheid wees. Nee, Jan van Riebeeck is 'n kind van God, maar nie 'n kind van die waarheid nie. In the evening, we again saw the star with the tail. Jong, hierdie komeet is nou al vir hoe lank in die lug? Die heel eerste Kersfees aan die Kaap, wat in die eerste Kersfees gebeur? Obtained 8 sheep. Last night, a sheep in the kraal was almost totally devoured by a wild beast. Again this evening, when it was dark, 7 or 8 wild animals crossed the ditches, a good 8 feet wide with water 4 feet deep. Nou praat hulle hierso van wat hulle gedoen het om dit nou te help. Stop sit. Today some of the very oldest Saldanhas, together with their captain, brought 4 sheep, which we bartered from them. They had not been here for a long time. En ons sien ook glad nie meer so baie beeste wat tevoorskyn kom. Ek dink hulle laas sit op 88, 89 beeste. En daar is nou nog nie weer 'n bees gekry nie. Today, the day after Christmas, we churned the first batter from about half an anchor of milk, obtained 2 pounds of fairly good yellow butter. We are also doing our best to make cheese, though we lack several utensils which we should obtain at the first opportunity. Gee vir 'n Hollander genoeg melk en hy sal kaas maak. Die suidooster, hier kom die suidooster nou. During the night, the southeast wind began to blow harder than it has ever done before, continuing all night to such an extent that the patrol guard could not remain on his feet on the ramparts, and it seemed that if everything would be blown down and torn to bits. Nowhere else in the world can it blow as vehemently as the southeast wind does here. Indeed, at times it surpasses West Indian hurricanes and Japanese typhoons. Die suidooster. Today bartered 1 cow and 7 sheep from the Saldanhas who were here yesterday. So daar kry jy nog 1 koei. The Saldanhas brought us another 5 sheep, a cow, and 2 calves today. In order to entice them, we bartered these from them at a somewhat higher price than before. Nou praat ons nou weer oor die vissermanne. They also told us that they had an encounter with their enemies, the fishermen, a day or 2 ago, killing 4 of them and taking away or robbing them of many cattle. They requested us to oblige them by sending ourselves against the fishermen, who, according to them, were in any case a crowd of robbers and would, when they came here, endeavor to steal our cattle. To this we replied that we remained disposed to live and trade in friendship with them, the Saldanhamen, and when the fishermen arrived here, we should see what kind of people they are. But we would in any case remain attached to the Saldanhamen in order always to live in friendship with them. This seemed to please them. Ek is nou al klaar mee, dus ons nog eers naby aan die Weskus expedisie nie. Sunday the 29th, today obtained 4 sheep and 2 head of cattle. On counting the stock today, we found 18 sheep missing. The herdsman admitted that these had been lost a few days ago through their negligence. Apparently van the principal 3 herdsmen, Jan Geilsteen, Pieter Martinussen, and Rudolf Hendriksen were penalized. Each were debited with 6 sheep at 2 reals each. So daar sê die maatskappy, julle het 18 skape verloor, ons dok nou vir julle 18 skape se waarde van julle payslips af. Genadeloos. On visiting dis nou op die 30ste. On visiting the gardens today, we found that as a result of the strong winds which have blown with extreme severity during the past 5 or 6 days, our young green peas, which were blossoming beautifully and promised to be ripe by the arrival of the return fleet, had been blown to shreds. So daar doen die plaas ook nie meer so great nie. Dis maak met die ander groente en vrugte en goed het gesurvive. We are already having some mutton at table every day. So dis maak met daar so die kos kom in en so aan en hulle kan nou al meer gereeld skaap eet. The churning is going fairly well and we have already accumulated about 6 pounds of fresh butter. Sometimes we dish out to the men bowls of buttermilk, which will also serve in no small way as refreshment for the coming ships. In view of the good promise shown by the cattle, we might be able to make cheese. We lack utensils, however. We have, praise God, already advanced to the stage where we can eat fresh butter on our bread at table, using the Dutch butter for the rest of the food. We can also make preparations for baking bread from our new wheat. If possible, we want to get everything going so as to be able to refresh the ships which with God's mercy there is every prospect of doing reasonably well in the future. Today obtained 1 calf and 5 sheep. Sent 6 soldiers today over the kloof between Table Mountain and the Lion Mountain behind the fort to look for sheep, and also instructed them to go behind the Table Mountain to find out at the same time the strength of the Saldanhas. The soldiers returned in the afternoon and reported that they had not found our sheep, but had seen a great multitude of cattle and sheep belonging to the Saldanhas, mostly behind the Table Mountain in the Little Hout Bay. Sien het daar hulle nou van die fort geskuif na daar Hout Bay se kant toe. Altogether there were not more than 500 souls, but they had a countless multitude of cattle. The natives were much afraid of our men. Meanwhile, some natives occasionally arrived at the fort with sheep, of which we traded 12. Towards evening, some new Saldanhas arrived with a milk cow. We obtained her at a reasonable price. They intimated that they and a large number of their people were encamped near the salt pan 4 miles from here. Dan praat hulle hier weer oor die suidooster wat waai. Ek is nou al klaar 15 minute. Oor 'n uur. Maar ek kan dit nie meer hou nie. Ek kan sien ek my oë begin te dwaal wat ek nou al lees. Kom ons sit net vir julle hierso. Sê tog daar vir my iets. Ek sien ek het hier 'n paar. Daar is die eerste jaar nou op sy rug. Van nou af vorentoe is dit 1653. Die jaar het afgesluit met 'n komeet in die lug. Kan julle dit glo, 'n hele komeet. Jy praat van ons eie mense wat steel. Ek sal jou vertel van wittes wat plaasaanvalle gereël het om sekuriteit te bemark en te verkoop. RSA baan, wat vertel jy nou van my? Wat, dis verskriklik. Geniet die storietyd, dankie. De slaaptyd stories met Klipkop in Her Majesty the Queen's vernacular. Ek is nogal verbaas met hoe die boek lees. Ek sou gedink dit is, jy weet, baie offisieel en tot op die punt, jy weet. Jy sal nou sien die boekhouer het die stuk oor Saldanha geskryf, hulle tweede ekspedisie. Dit is baie, jy weet, pedanties en korrek en so aan. Maar smaak van Jan van Riebeeck, of al ten minste die ou wat vir hom geboek gehou het, skryf lekker, jy weet, en dit is eintlik een groot avontuur. Dit is 'n avontuurboek wat voor ons afspeel, maar dit is, jy weet, dit is nie fiksie nie. Dit is, wat is teenoorgestelde van fiksie? Dit is nie fiksie. Ja, die wittes wat by ons self steel, ek meen, ons is 'n klomp seerovers gewees, 'n klomp Robert Jacksons, en baie van hulle het hulle self gedra soos Hans Wors, ons gaan nou lees daaroor. Ek gaan vanaand 2 ure stream, maak nie saak nie. Ek meen, julle kan, dink baie van die mense wat nou al geloop is, of seker weer, hier teen volgende naweek, Vrydag, weer verveeld. Kom ons gaan luister gou die storie van Jan en sy manne klaar. En dit was ook redelijk maklik, julle weet, as ek begin rook en nonsens praat, skip net vorentoe die video, tot wanneer die boek weer opkom. Ok, daar is nou halfpad. Kom maar kyk of ek weer kan fokus. Focus, papi, focus. Rook en geniet. Ek is erger as 'n Saldaner oor 'n stukkie tabak. Ek wil graag, waar gewees het? Daar gewees het. Januarie 1653, daar skop is nou die nuwe jaar af. New Year's Day, the southeast wind still blowing as violently as before. The Saldanhas arrived fairly early with 7 sheep, which we traded from them before divine service. Today, throughout the intercession of various persons and on promise of amending their conduct, were released from irons in which they had been condemned to remain for 2 years for having absconded. The persons Gerrit Dirksen, Jan Blanks en Willem Heinkies. Jan Blanks, ons gunsteling ou. My gunsteling ou ten minste. Ek het tot my Twitter naam verander na ek is Jan Blanks. In elk geval, daar, hulle kan weer gaan. Op die tweede, same stormy weather from the southeast, obtained 8 sheep van die Saldanhas. Daar kan julle nou sien, hulle verkoop nie meer beeste nie, is nou net skape. Op die derde praat hulle weer van die windwaai, boisterous. Obtained 5 sheep from the natives, niks beeste nie. Op die vierde, sent a sick comforter with the corporal of soldiers and 6 musketeers with some copper, tobacco and pipes to the Saldanhas to inquire whether they would rather trade with us there than here. Daar doen hulle weer 'n bietjie bemarking. Returning in the afternoon, they brought with them 2 cows, 1 bull, 1 ox, 1 heifer and 1 calf, as well as 11 sheep bartered from the Saldanhas 1.5 miles from here. According to them, the Saldanhas would apparently be more inclined to trade with us there than come to the fort, so we intend trying again the day after tomorrow, Monday. Besides the cattle obtained by our men, a few Saldanhas who returned with them brought another 4 cows and 1 calf and 6 sheep. So daar is so 'n paar koeie en kalwe. We have also obtained by barter, so that today we purchase 9 head of cattle and 24 sheep. Daar kom dan so 'n paar beeste in, gelukkig. It is to be wished that we had some more tobacco, as the supply is running out. This would be most embarrassing for us, for it is easier to obtain cattle for tobacco without copper than for copper without tobacco, as often noted before. Today obtained 12 sheep and 2 cows, 1 ox, 2 calves and 1 heifer from the Saldaners for copper and tobacco, of which the last roll is half gone, so that the tobacco will thus be exhausted before the copper. Early in the morning, once more sent the sick comforter Willem Barendsen Williant, accompanied by a few soldiers with copper and tobacco to the Saldaners. So dit smaak maar, hulle stuur nou die mense uit om die vee te bruil. Dit is waarvoor die kompanie vir Jan van Riebeeck gestuur het. Hulle moet die veehandel bewerkstellig met die plaaslike inboorlinge. En dit is nou al wat hulle kan doen. Hulle moet agter hulle aangaan. Die plaaslike inboorlinge wil nie na ons toe kom nie. Vir my wil dit lyk asof hulle nie eintlik aan belang gestel het. Hulle wou eintlik uitgelos gewees het. Waarop die meeste van hulle, natuurlik nie Harry nie, Harry wil daar gekamp het. Harry en sy spannetjie. Maar die ander mense wou eintlik maar uitgelos gewees het. Towards evening our men returned with 5 cows, 1 ox, 3 calves and 5 heifers, as well as 8 sheep obtained from the Saldaners. In addition to these were obtained here at the fort 2 cows and 2 calves. Daar lyk my, daar kry ons nou weer 'n klomp koeie by. Daar is nou weer 'n goeie teken. It has also been noticed often before that when there is a man alone or when there are 2 or 3 of our men together, hatchets and tobacco boxes, etc. are taken from them by force. Hence, we will in future send a larger number of men to obtain cattle who will be more able to defend themselves, even though our work here should thereby be still further retarded. This we must do in order to secure a large supply of cattle for refreshment for the ships, as we do not have the Saldaners here all year around and should now make use of this opportunity. We have noticed that we have to seek them, as apparently they do not want to come to us, being a very lazy people. It is sometimes too much effort for them to drive their cattle far, even when they are on the move, let alone to bring the cattle to the market. Daar is sy indruk, soos ek die storie lees, klink het al vir my asof die Saldaners nie regtig waar so baie belang gestel het met wat hy al ons hier maak nie. Praat hulle weer van die Suidooster. Obtained 3 cows, 1 ox and 2 calves, as well as 4 sheep today. Sent the sick comforter with 20 armed men out again with some copper and tobacco to trade cattle. In the meantime, obtained here at the fort 1 ox, 1 calf and 10 sheep. Ons is nou by, hier is nou waar die veldrotasie storie inkom weer. In the morning, very fine, calm, warm weather as yesterday. Our men returned with 1 cow, 2 calves and 3 sheep, reporting that all the Saldaners with their camps and cattle had departed in an easterly direction towards the Bay de Sambras, where, Harry explained to us, they tracked every year and from there across the country to the west again, returning hither via the Bay of Saldanha. The said sheep and cattle had been obtained from the captain of those Saldaners who had been the very first to come to us, and who were now encamped all by themselves, a good 7 or 8 miles due east from here, almost on the beach. Nou, 7 or 8 miles, dit is Hollandse miles, Dutch miles, en jy moet daai getal met 4 maal, dan moet jy, as jy nou met 4 gemaal het, moet jy hom dan weer met 1.6 maal, om by kilometer uit te kom, so dit is nou al 'n redelik entjie. So dit lyk vir my werklik, dit is 'n geval van, hulle het van Saldanha het hulle getrek, verby die fort, nou gaan hulle oos, en hulle roteer nou so, en elke jaar doen hulle so 'n siklus, hulle wy, hulle brand, hulle skuif aan, dan kom hulle terug, doen hulle so in 'n siklus. They number about 80 able-bodied men, living in 16 huts and having with them 500 or 600 extraordinary fine cattle. So hierdie groot groep beeste en skaap wat hulle sien, hier's definitief kleiner groepies van die Saldaners wat Hulle is nie een groot groep nie, dis kleiner groepies wat rondtrek. Hulle trek saam, maar ook nie saam nie, jy weet. The best among all the Saldanha cattle and approximately 2,200 equally fine sheep. With these they have never yet parted, nor did they wish to do so. Our men had to suffer much insult from them, so much so that they had nearly come to blows. Dit is vir my duidelik dat hierdie mense stel nie belang in die handel nie, hulle wil uitgelos wees. But they tolerated it and left the matter at that, in view of our express instructions not to do the natives the least harm in the world, whatever annoyance they may have to suffer. According to our men, however, it was as much as they could bear, and for that reason they had felt inclined to take all the Saldanha's cattle and bring them here. They were near enough and had the opportunity of doing so. For when the corporal of the soldiers, being pressed rather closely by them, in order to rid himself of them, fired off a small pistol from his pocket over their heads, all the Saldanhas took flight, leaving their cattle behind. They therefore had to be called back, and the cattle driven after them, with the explanation that it had only been a jest. Hy het in jest 'n skoot oor hulle kop afgevuur. And that there was no intention to do them any harm or to take any of their cattle, but to buy them for copper and tobacco. If they were not so inclined, they could come and go as freely as they wished. No harm would come to them from us, etc. In the end, they parted good friends, and for a farewell received a little tobacco. Nou ek het al, wat hier gebeur is, hierdie boek is 'n timesheet. Nou julle ouens wat nou al nagskof en so aan gewerk het, julle weet hoe werk 'n timesheet. Die storie wat regtig waar gebeur het, en die storie wat jy vir die baas terugskryf, wat hy die volgende dag moet lees, weet, dis gewoonlik die waarheid, maar hulle praat van cover your own ass. Ek wil graag eintlik die ware storie hier geweet het. Dit smaak vir my, iets klink hier reg hierson nie. Hy het in jest 'n skoot oor hulle koppe glad afweer. Dit smaak my, hulle wil nou graag die Saldanhas beginne forceer om met hulle handel te dryf. Maar dit lyk vir my, daar is ten minste sekere groepies onder die Saldanhas, wat hulle wil nie met hulle handel dryf, hulle wil uitgelos word, en dit smaak my, hierdie is een van daai groepies, en hulle word nou geforceer om handel te dryf. Hier praat ons nou weer oor die groepe. Discussing the departure of the Saldanhas with Harry, we learned from him that we need not expect them back before next year. But then, besides them, many other natives living in the interior, on seeing how much copper the Saldanhas brought with them, would come here to trade with us, which we should see for ourselves in due course. But as soon as the Saldanhas, called Kuena among them, who are always moving short distances with their cattle from one good pasture to another, had moved away far enough, the fishermen called Suwakwa, die ondersê hulle, ja, maar die Suwakwa word laterand genoem die Sonkwa, would come here with a small number of cattle. According to him, we should have to be very much on our guard against these natives who would bring us cattle for sale, as they would, under the mask of friendship, seek to do us all possible harm, stealing and robbing us for as much as they could. After all, they lived on nothing else but what they stole. None of their possessions were their own. Everything had been stolen from the Saldanhas, who consequently pursued them at every opportunity, and when they caught any of them, killed them without mercy and threw them to the dogs. Nou sê hulle hierso, there remain at present 350 sheep and 130 cattle. Daar weet hulle nou omtrent hoeveel beeste en skape en goed is. Mense, ek gaan nie vanaand by die beeskas uitkom nie. Last night, 2 more sheep were taken from the kraal by wild beasts and devoured, apparently lions, according to the spoor. praat hulle weer oor die suidooster in die 10de en die 11de, toe daar amper niks by die fort gebeur nie. Today obtained from the Soldanus 2 more sheep. Last night another sheep was killed by a lion. Ja mense, ons is nou in Afrika. Op die 13de, it is a pity that the southeast wind is so violent here. Otherwise, enough of all sorts of grains and fruits could be cultivated. We think, however, that the crops will not be exposed to such danger in the valleys beyond the Salt River. These are not subjected to the heavy squalls that come down from the Table Mountain. The land could accordingly be cultivated by advantage by freemen. It is rich, fine, and level, with many exceedingly fine fresh rivers running through it, and as pleasant and flat as can be desired. Op die 14de, today the Soldanus brought us another cow and a calf, which we bartered from them for copper and tobacco. Meanwhile, when we discussed with our interpreter Harry, as we have done often before, what the Soldanus did with the copper, he gave us to understand in broken English that they made from it the bracelets and chains which we have seen them wearing. These they again bartered with certain other tribes far inland for cattle. So hulle het hierdie goedjies het hulle gaan verkoop aan die ander mense. Hier's nog prentjies vir julle. When taking aim, the soldier placed his heavy arquebus on the forked rest. The burning match was then applied to the powder. Hier is natuurlik Jan Blank se werk. Hy was 'n arkebuiser, boezier. Had however already been implemented so that the match could be applied more swiftly and surely. Nou daarso kan julle sien, hy staan so half met 'n kom vat gou hierdie lig weg. Kan julle sien hulle daar kan julle nou mooi sien. Hy het 'n toukie in sy hand wat smeul. Nou daar is hy geweer daarbo. Nou jy druk die punt van daai smeulende toukie. Druk jy daar bo by die geweer en dat hy afgaan. Dis hoe ek het nou verstaan. En hierdie stok wat hy vashou is so half sy dooie rus wat hy gebruik, want hy moet mos nou sy een hand gebruik om die toukie daarin te druk. Dit is hoe, dis amper soos 'n skerp skutter van daardie tyd. Ek gaan gelukkig hier 'n bietjie vinniger. Wat het hy hieroor gepraat? Op die 15de, today the Soldanus came with another cow and 5 sheep, which we obtained from them. So daar kom heeltyd 'n klein bietjie in. Daar's nooit wat hulle kom en hulle kom koop en verkoop op groot maat nie. En hulle verwys ook nie spesifiek na other Soldaners. Definitief, daar is kleiner subgroepe onder die Soldaners. Die 16de Januarie. Last night another cow as well as a bull were lost through the negligence of the gods. It is most depressing that the men take so little to heart the duty for which they are responsible, nor do they seem to care in the least what punishment or promise one gives them. Time and again, when one thinks that now one has a careful man in charge of the cattle, one finds oneself disappointed. It has almost become necessary to go personally to keep a watch over them night and day. Op die 17de, in the morning, the weather being misty, had all the cattle counted again and found that instead of 138, the number there should have been, there were only 126. That is, 12 were lost through the carelessness of the gods, as stated before. From all their confessions, it is clear that one had attended to the watch in the kraal at night as little as the other. Die mense het gedros, soal dis wat hulle gesê het. For this, the 6 of them were punished by debiting each with 2 beasts at 50 guilders each, that they may keep better watch in the future. Ons verloor 12 beeste, julle betaal vir ons 12 beeste. Hulle sê hierso, although Although we sent the corporal of the soldiers and some men to look for the missing cattle, neither hoof nor horn could be found. We cannot but presume that every now and then they are taken from the kraal at night by the Hottentots. Ek het so half gevoel, daar's 'n moontlikheid. Ons het dit self opgevreet, skelm. Daar's 'n klomp skelmblankes wat tussen ons. As last night the gates in the wall of the kraal were twice found open with cattle outside. When we told this to our interpreter Harry, he was also of the opinion that the cattle might have been driven away by some strandlopers. En hy sê, ja maar, die mense moet elke aand, moet hulle die beeste en die skape tel. In the afternoon, the yacht Goede Hoop returned here from the Bay of Saldanha with about 1,500 large and small sealskins reasonably well dried. Nou, ek is nou amper 'n uur en 'n half besig. It was astonishing how many whales were in the said bay and near the islands thereabout, for since the end of August, none have been seen in this bay. It would therefore not be out of place for whale catching to be considered. Nou hier begin ons nou, as julle kan sien, copy of diary kept by the provisional bookkeeper Frederik Verbrugge on his second voyage to the Bay of Saldanha and the islands lying thereabout, having departed with the yacht Goede Hoop from Table Bay 1652. Nou ek is nou al meer as 'n uur en 'n half aan die gang. Ek het in die titel gesit, dit gaan vanaand behandel word, maar dit smaak my, volgende week Sondag gaan ons dit eers behandel. As julle 'n klein voorsmaakie wil hê, die mense wat na dit kyk, as julle 'n bietjie wil aanlees, so begin die storie. Maar vir vanaand is ek eers klaar. Ek is jammer. Nou gaan ek gou weer die laaste halwe sigaretjie rook. Dan gaan ek vir julle sê vaarwel, doei. Klipkop, okay, ek sal 'n volledige pos maak op Skandpaal en jou tag. Toe 'n prokureur en sy broer uitgeloop het, toe skiet hy, lees so lank op oor Niels en Bert, Uhuru Guru Oosthuizen, en die murderplot. Die Uhuru Guru. Ja. Richard Tron, Koesterfontein, Small Holdings. Ek sien ek het daarom 16 kykers wat nog die laaste 45 minute ook gekyk het. Ek wil vir julle sê, baie dankie die ou getroues, wat ook vir Klipkop wil kom luister. En as daar niks is nie, gaan ek nou eers vir julle sê, vaarwel. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Nie forever nie, net tot volgende Sondag toe, dan kan jy weer peace. Maar jy sal moet knyp om jou peace in te hou. Ek het al vir Dagbreker aan die slaap gelees. Nou maar as die seker nou klaar is en daar is nou niks om te sê nie. Ja, ek sien daar so is nog 'n boek wat nou een van die dae gerelease gaan word. Of daar geklaag, ek moet nog by die ou se naam uitkom. Ek het 'n nota daarvan gemaak. Wat 'n Khoi perspektief gee van wat gebeur het hier in die Kaap. Hy sê hy het die belangrikste gedeeltes het hy gekies om in sy boek te sit. Ek dink hy het die belangrikste gedeeltes baie selektief gekies om 'n sekere narratief voor te stel. Ek kan miskien daardie boek ook aanskaf net om dit te expose. Ek sien my sein is baie delayed. Ek sien my besigheid, hy gaan ook elke nou en dan rooi. Maar mense, ek wil vir julle sê, Ek wil net die rok besigheid doen. Baie dankie dat julle ingeskakel het. Onthou daar is absoluut geen skaamte daarin om jou kop uit jou gat uit te trek nie. Ons moet opstaan vir daardie mense wat vir ons opstaan. Dit is altyd volhard en hou koers. Dan moet ek met my keyboard uitkom. Bliksem. Oef. Asai. Tjus.
Shane aldo te hulle heet tas weet no kuje ani by die boas maar mente ani kapte duidelijk now whether you brain swat rooi wat net so lang goed no die jo gaat terug die American say getting jiggy with it maar mente van die kapte duidelijk as duidelijk o say as duidelijk as duidelijk nou praat ons af je sling. Die mensen denken zomaar als een spat van een gang. Een sissoenie, karada. En die baai zijn die mensen allemaal. La, 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 la. En PE zijn die mensen die bouw valkou. La, 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 la. En Durban, KwaZulu-Natal zijn er hundreds en thousands en al. Kom mani jodi hulle te pasha Shane aldo te hulle heet tas weet no kuje ani by die boas maar die mente ani kapte duidelijk now whether you brain swat rooi wat net so lang goed no die jo gaat terug die American say getting jiggy with it maar die mente van die kapte duidelijk as duidelijk o say as duidelijk as duidelijk Yo, wat zit jullie gewoon weer die ouwens het aan die goud in Joburg, my broer, jasses. Die ouwens het mos passaas. La, 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 la. Kijk eens hoe ze jullie mossen naar Makolanda Mabia. Hoe zeg jij? La, 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 la. Kijk je ouwens, die zijn aan het ding. Wie zo bij ons aan die kaap? As alles. Kom mani jodi hulle te pasha Shane aldo te hulle heet tas weet no kuje ani by die boas maar die mente ani kapte duidelijk now whether you brain swat rooi wat net so lang goed no die jo gaat terug die American say getting jiggy with it maar die mente van die kapte duidelijk as duidelijk o say as duidelijk as duidelijk as day